Okay, Q&A.
So I think I've heard you talk about this concept before, that the challenges that people have in their lives seem to be proportional to what they're able to handle. So I was wondering, does that mean that if these challenges are proportional, that all people are rewarded equally for their challenges, since it's proportional to what you could do? And also, we're able to say that certain challenges are harder. And if also that premise is false, how should we be viewing challenges that people receive in their life?
I'm not quite sure I got all the details of the question, but first of all, yes. The principle is you are able to succeed in meeting every challenge. But you have to read that proposition backwards. It doesn't mean every obstacle you can overcome, even though it looks impossible to you, but it can't be impossible, because God doesn't ask things from you that are impossible. No, it means the other way around. It means some obstacles that are in your way are possible for you to overcome. Some obstacles in your way are impossible for you to overcome. And the obstacles that are in your way that are impossible to overcome aren't challenges. Only the obstacles that are possible to overcome are challenges. No, if they're impossible to overcome, then they're not challenges. Right. Otherwise, God would be shooting you in the foot. And he doesn't do that. Now, that means you can make the judgment as to which obstacles are possible for you to overcome and which not. This isn't infallible. You will make mistakes, yes, and they could be biased, yes. But there is a difference between the obstacles which are possible to overcome and which are impossible to overcome. If you have difficulty making the decision, then ask for help, ask to take counsel with someone. Often people who I've seen people like you develop can say, this is not for you right now. This will be for you 2 years from now. Right now, you shouldn't be investing in that. So, this is the difference between possible and impossible. If it's impossible, it's not a challenge. Often, when you're facing an obstacle which is impossible to overcome, the challenge is to live with your inability to overcome it, rather than to beat your head against it in an endless frustration because you think you have to overcome it. So, someone says, I read about the Vilna Gaon. He studied 18 hours a day on a bad day. A good day was 20 hours a day. So I'm a failure. I'm an utter, terrible disaster. Because if I can study 3 hours without losing concentration, that's a good day for me. No, you're not. You're not supposed to do what the Vilna Gaon was doing. At least at this moment in time, it's impossible for you to do what the Vilna Gaon did. There are many sources that indicate this. And I've talked about it before in 2 places, in the Rambam and other places. Now, having said that, are all challenges equally difficult to overcome? And and how does that relate to the reward you get for overcoming it? No, of course they're not all equally easy to overcome. You know that. Some people, when they get started studying Torah, they get so off base and so off balance that they think, I don't know, maybe marshmallows are butterflies. I don't know. The system is so different and so difficult. It isn't so different and it isn't so difficult. And your normal judgments about life, most of them are correct. And you know very well that it is not possible for you to start speaking Chinese tomorrow. It's also not possible for you just to get onto a unicycle and ride it now. And it's not possible for you to play Flight of the Bumblebee on a tuba, because the tuba won't allow it. And there are things that are impossible to do or impossible for you to do at the present moment. Now, obviously, some things are harder than other things. You see someone and he says hello, and you're distracted and you're thinking about something, or you're not in a good mood, and your mind says, yeah, but it's not his fault that I'm not in a good mood. So you say, okay, and you put on a smile and you say, good morning. Now compare that to someone who insults you brutally in public in a very embarrassing way, and because you're from Texas you have your right fist ready, to rectify the situation, and you have to overcome your impulse and maybe your habit to solve these problems in a certain way, and that's much harder than just saying hello to the guy. So, of course, there are some that are harder and some that are easier. We have a rule that the more difficult it is to do the right thing, the more reward you get for doing the right thing because you invested more effort. So obviously not all challenges are equal.
How about on individual levels, like the amount of challenges that someone faces in their life could be more than someone else? Or the severity of the challenges overall could be more than someone else?
Well, I don't know if we can measure amount or severity in any coin that's common for all. But let's put it this way. HaKadosh Baruch Hu gerrymanders your circumstances and the events that occur to you so as to give you the maximum opportunity to develop yourself spiritually. Now, this is like those old stories based on a maze, If you choose between A and B and choose A, then the next choice is between C and D. If you choose B, then the next choice is between P and Q, because the choice you made makes the next step relevant and defines the next relevant step for your progress. So there's no question that different people will have different paths, and different paths will have different qualities. But at each stage, when you make a decision, that's the decision at that your stage, which will be the one that can contribute most to your continuing development. That we can say.
So again, just one other element of it too, is that if two people are able to overcome the challenges in their life, can we say that, for instance, one will be rewarded more for the challenges that they overcome just because how more difficult they are?
Well, you think about the challenge? I mean, life is filled with uncountable challenges. You mean sum total of all challenges? No. The Rambam says that a person has free will, has the ability to be equally righteous to Moses. Moses being the top of righteousness. And that would mean that everyone has the opportunity through his lifetime to achieve the pinnacle. So it's not going to be gerrymandered so that because I gave you these challenges, you're going to be subpar. That's not correct. Yeah.
I didn't even have my hand up, but I'll go.
Oh,
no, I'm kidding. So, I'll ask just quickly, isn't there a sense, if we have an idea of reincarnation, maybe you can, because of past actions in your life, you can, in previous lives, you can limit your access to the pinnacle in a subsequent life? Or is it that you're facing the same test as if someone who was going into it fresh?
Okay, reincarnation is a big,
Sorry.
no, you don't have to be sorry. I'm just apologizing for the fact that I'm not going to speak now for 3 hours. But I'll tell you this, which I think will give you a different perspective on it. One of the things that Mazal says is like this. The neshama is divided up into different features, like everything is divided up. Let's just pick an arbitrary number. Let's say it's divided into 10 features. It is, and also into 613 and other divisions. Let's talk about 10 features. Now, in your lifetime, you're given opportunities to perfect your neshama, your soul. Perfect all 10. Let's say you have partial success. You perfect all but 1, 4, and 9. Then in reincarnation, only 1, 4, and 9 come back. The ones that are perfected are sequestered. They're taken off and put in storage. No chance is taken that something which was perfected becomes damaged. 1, 4, and 9 can come back each separately. Now you say, now wait a second. A soul is composed of 10 pieces. You have 3 pieces. If you have 1 piece, then you don't have a soul, and you don't have a person. But you see, each piece subdivides into 10. Piece 4 is composed of piece 4.1, 4.2, 4.3, 4.4, 4.5. It is a microcosm of a whole soul. So 4 can get back by itself and inhabit the body and play the role of a person and go through a lifetime, and the same thing repeats. It has 10 pieces, and each of the 10 pieces, all 10 could become perfected. If some are, they are taken off, and the ones that remain are come back for another reincarnation. So we're playing a game of successive successive approximation, successive achievement, and you can get to the point where you finish up the job, and then they're all perfected, but now they're all split, and they're split into different personalities. So there's no chance of losing what you have accomplished. There's only a chance of improving. The purpose of reincarnation is to improve. Now, the Arizal has like 300 pages on reincarnation, so I'm not pretending I haven't read it all, I don't understand it all. I'm just giving you a snippet and subject to further investigation. Yeah.
When we say that everyone has the potential to be as on the same level as Moshe, do we mean that throughout their lifetime, at every given moment, that's true, or like at the beginning of their lifetime, or how does that work? Because like if someone's about to die, right, and they're not like Moshe, how can we see that that's true?
Now, you see, I didn't say like, and I didn't say level. I said tzaddik.
Okay.
That's the Rambam's word. Rambam's word is tzaddik. So B'chanav Asserman comments on this Rambam, which is the beginning of chapter 5 of Hilchos Tshuva. He comments and says, if I would serve HaKadosh Baruch Hu with all my strength for 1,000 years, I wouldn't come up to Moses' ankles. So what then does the Rambam mean? He doesn't mean that your achievement, your performance would be equal to Moses' performance. You'll be the greatest prophet of all time. Push Moses off the pedestal, right? And violate one of our principles of faith. And the greatest leader, and so forth and so on. No. What it means is, I could serve HaKadosh Baruch Hu with all my strength, just as Moses served HaKadosh Baruch Hu with all his strength. If I did that, I would be equally a tzaddik. Because tzaddik means you did everything that you could do. Tzaddik means you used your potential, you used your abilities, your resources in the best possible way. Possible for you. Performance depends upon what resources you were given, what talents you have, what powers you have. We aren't given equal talents and resources. So it would be utterly unjust to say you get 40% resources and your ceiling's 40%. See? You're condemned. Because Rabbi doesn't play that game. He gives you resources. He judges you on the way in which you use the resources that you're given. Rambam is saying that each person could use his resources ideally, just as Moses used his resources ideally. Now, let's reflect, and coming to the details of your question, let's reflect that each person is a person in progress. Moses made mistakes. He was punished for them. Of course, he did tshuva, and repaired them in the way that tshuva repaired them. All of us make mistakes. Ein Adam Tzaddik Ba'aretz Asher Ya'aseh V'lo Yechta. Said King Solomon, there's no person righteous in the earth who will do good and not fail. So we're talking now about the state achieved at the end, given the processes that went into achieving it. And if there are failures, then the failures should be repaired. If they're repaired, they won't count against a person at the end. So I think that we're talking about the end state. And some people take longer to get to the end state, some take longer to repair the things that have gone wrong. And the sum total life then could be equally righteous to that of Moses. That's what the Rambam says, and that's what Rabbi Chanan said about it.
So you're saying that, so it's really that if a person uses his life ideally, even if he makes mistakes and he covers those up like in the best possible way, blah, 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 that's what, and uses all his resources, that's what the Rambam means.
I think so, yeah. Right.
Is it inappropriate to try to visualize Hashem in a certain kind of way during the Amidah? Mm-hmm. Is there like a right way to do it, or like, because they say like when you're davening the Amidah and you're taking the steps forward, you're entering his palace, right? When you see the palace, you see everything else like in your imagination, but you can't really see him. Like, how do you try to make that connection there?
You know, I was wondering how seriously you're using the word visualize. I wouldn't rely on visual qualities at all. If you like, imagine a person who's blind from birth, doesn't have sight. But he's read what you've read, and he understands what you understand about HaKadosh Baruch Hu. And when he's told that when he takes the 3 steps forward, he's coming into Hashem's presence. He won't have any visual picture of it because there's no visual pictures at all. That doesn't mean he's going to be missing out on awe, on focus, on that sense of enormous opportunity, that sense of closeness, all those things you can experience without visual pictures. So I don't think that visual pictures are going to help even for the palace. You know, you can take the descriptions from the beginning of the book of Esther, right? You know, the onyx and the trappings, the tapestry and everything else. I think that would just be distracting. Indeed, if you look in the Shulchan Aruch where it describes the experience of prayer, it reads like a tractate on meditation. He says you lose consciousness of your surroundings. You lose your sense of the physical altogether. You're engrossed in an experience which eclipses the physical altogether. So, although at a certain stage in development, maybe a visual imagery would help, but I don't think that's the ideal. The ideal is to sense a presence, which, for example, a blind person could sense also, without any imagery at all. Yeah.
So, if we think about long-term gratification, not instant gratification, is our long-term gratification the thing we should have in mind, Olam Haba? Is that the thing we should be working towards in the long run?
Yeah. So this is a very important question, and I'll talk about a couple of sources about it. Should you have in mind that your goal is to achieve Olam Haba? And you use the word gratification, and I think it's not a bad word. I would use the word pleasure also. The description of Olam Haba is neheni miziv hashchina, which means enjoying the shine of the presence of the Shechina, of God's presence, whatever that means ultimately, but there's definitely a kind of enjoyment. Now, the Rambam writes in chapter 10 of the Laws of Repentance, the Choshuva, that the ideal is to serve HaKadosh Baruch Hu out of love for the master who commanded what you're doing. Avas Adon Shetzivakei. And he specifically says, ideally, you don't do it for any selfish motivation, including the world to come. He says that word for word. That's the ideal, not to do it even for the world to come. Now, if a person, I want to tell you now, is a summary, and this could be tricky, and there could be other conditions that have to be put in, but generally, not everybody's on that level. Indeed, the Rambam himself says that's a level that takes an enormous amount of effort and time to achieve. In the meantime, you may be serving God out of the desire for a reward. After all, because Baruch Hu promised us reward and punishment. Reward and punishment naturally motivate. They're not doing that to trip us up. It's just that at a certain point, you should graduate beyond that. But if you haven't gotten to that point yet, to do it for the reward that He's promising you and to avoid the punishment that He's threatening you with certainly makes your actions correct. You do satisfy the mitzvah, and you will get rewarded for that. It's just, I would call it a kind of immature type of service of God. So, now the Rambam also says in chapters 8 and 9 of the Laws of Repentance, that it is appropriate to desire being in the world to come. Desire is something that's appropriate for a human being. Ta'ava in Hebrew, which has a bad name, taiva, evil, dead, But of course, Baruch Hu was described as having ta'avos, so they can't be all bad. Po eshev ki ivisiha, I'll dwell here because I've desired it. Because Baruch Hu mesavos filosh tzadikim, because Baruch Hu desires the prayers of the tzadikim. The human being should have ta'ava for the world to come. But that shouldn't be what's pushing him to do the mitzvah, ideally. Now finally, there's something which I just got a couple of emails about this last week. So since there's a confusion about it, if you look at the Mesilas Yesharim, the path of the just, in the first chapter, he says a person has to know that he was created for his position in the world to come. Everything you do here is in order to get into the world to come. Everything should be done and measured by its ability to get you into the world to come. So you read that, you say, Gottleib, I don't know where you're coming from. You just told me that you're supposed to be doing it out of love of the master who commanded it. Now you're telling me to do it to get into the world to come? That's not what it says. This I heard the name of Yaakov Weinberg, who's called Rabbi of Israel in Baltimore. That's not what it says. What it says there is this. A person has to know, Ma chovaso ba'olamo. What is his obligation in this world? Obligation. What is he required to do? And the answer is, you know what your obligation is, what you're required to do, by asking what God's purpose was in creating you. What does He want for you? What He wants for me is what I'm obligated to do, because He wants it. And then it says, His purpose in creating you is that you should get into the world to come. So that gives me my obligation to get into the world to come. That doesn't talk about my motivation. People can have many different kinds of motivations for satisfying their obligations. So he's obligated to pay taxes. Why does he pay taxes? Some people pay because they're honest. Some people pay because they're afraid of being caught. Some people pay because they know that they'll gain somebody's respect. Obligation and motivation are two different things. Obligation is a moral thing, and motivation is psychological. The same as the Shorim says in chapter 18, that your motivation should be to please the Kadosh Baruch Hu. That's the motivation. Why am I doing it? I'm doing it to please Him. What am I doing? You know what I'm doing? I'm doing what He wants me to do. What does He want me to do? He wants me to get into the world to come. So of course, I'm doing it because I want to please Him. So the first chapter is not describing my motivation. First chapter is describing my obligation. No contradiction between them whatsoever. So the bottom line is, if you serve Him for a reward, including the world to come, you have done the service, you'll get credit for it, and you will get it, but you should try to graduate to the point where you don't use anything selfish, including the world to come, as the motivation for doing what He commands you to do.
We've spoken a few times about the Mazal and how there are different ways to
About the what? What's the word?
Mazal.
Oh, Mazal, yeah, okay.
So, I mean, I'm wondering what type of sources or what type of relationship a Jewish person should have in order to understand how that Mazal actually works and affects his life.
Okay, so there's a big literature on this, and a lot of it is misunderstood. The word Mazal comes from the word nozel, which means to flow. Mazal means a flow. When you heard something good happen to someone, you say Mazel Tov, what you're saying is, you are experiencing a good flow. It's not good luck, and it's not, Sagittarius in the sky is benefiting you out of his beneficence. It means you are experiencing a good flow. Just like if in the secular world, A says to B, I got a raise in my job, so somebody would say, that's great. What is he doing? He's describing the situation as having a certain value, a certain virtue, and by describing it that way, he's empathizing with the person. He's showing that he shares the person's excitement about it. That's great. A Jew says to another Jew, that is a good flow from heaven, and he's doing the same thing. He's identifying with the person and saying, it's wonderful to hear that you are receiving this good flow from heaven. Now, there are heavenly forces, and they do flow, and they do, in fact, have an effect on our activities. The stars play a role in mediating that flow. It isn't that the stars have power. Nothing has power. Nothing has power. The Creator is giving everything its existence and its energy and its activity from the very beginning. But it's something in the flow chart of the distribution of the divine energy. The stars play a role in that way. He uses them as a channel, to put it that way. So that's all that you should be thinking about, is that there is this flow from above, and by doing the right thing, you access some of that flow, and you also stimulate some of that flow. Yeah.
When I do a good thing, when I use my resources properly in the moment, is Hashem affected by that?
I guess it depends what you mean by affected. Let's see. Let's imagine, you're playing squash. So you're throwing the ball at a wall, and you have these mitts. So now, when you throw the ball at the wall, it doesn't always come back at the same angle, does it? No, it depends upon the angle you throw it at. Are you affecting the wall? Well, sort of. It's true that the wall throws the ball back at different angles, but the wall is a body with a certain physical structure, operating according to a certain physical rule, and the rule is the angle of incidence is actually the angle of accident. It's just equal angles on a flat surface.
It's preset.
So the reaction to the stimulus is preset. Okay, so in a certain sense, the Kadosh Baruch Hu has principles for dealing with the world, and these principles, many of them are conditional principles. One principle is if A happens, then A star will follow, and the other principle is if B happens, B star will follow. And somebody says, well, this time God provided A star, and that time God provided B star. So didn't he change it? Didn't I change him, and so forth and so on? No, because both conditional principles were always involved, and you provided A the first time, you provided B the second time. You didn't affect him, even though the results that you got from him were different results. This is the answer to the question with prayer. People say in prayer, I'm asking here for something. Am I trying to change his mind? After all, when you ask for something, what you presume is that your asking could play a role in the outcome. If you were guaranteed that your asking would make no impact on the outcome, you wouldn't ask. And the Torah would never tell us to do something that's absurd. So we say, well, it means I'm imagining that it's at least possible that if I don't ask, I won't get, and if I do ask, I will get. So am I trying to change his mind? If I don't ask, I won't get. That means he's made up his mind. He doesn't want to give me. And now I'm asking so to get, which means that I have to change his mind. Isn't that true? No, it's not true. The logic is wrong. Kadosh Baruch Hu's preset condition can be, I've decided that if he doesn't ask, he doesn't get. If he does ask, he does get. So when you ask and you get, you haven't changed his mind. His mind always was, if he doesn't ask, he doesn't get. If he does ask, he does get. His mind stays exactly the same. And what happens to you depends on which of the two conditional principles you trigger by what you do. So I think that's yeah.
I think the only sad part I see in that is that you can imagine a world where everybody maximized their free will properly, as opposed to one where they didn't and they muddled along the way. I know people make mistakes and so on, and that's built into it, but it seems like from Hashem's side of things, it's the same reaction, maybe right there at the outset of creation, versus the outcome where all the people in the system make the proper choices or do their absolute best, versus the one where they're more mediocre and do badly.
Well, I don't know if this is the question you're asking. It's put usually in more metaphysical terms. Maybe the same dynamic, and if so, it's a very difficult question. I don't know if we have adequate answers to it. There's a concept of divine hiddenness and progress towards revealing God. And there is idea that the more hidden, the more effort is required and the bigger accomplishment of revelation. So now you ask, well, what about Olam Haba in Gan Eden? They were given the tree. Had they succeeded in keeping the mitzvah of the tree, that would have been the end of our period of history, from the end of free will, the end of striving, it would have all been accomplished, gone from there into the next world. They failed, which brought great concealment into the world. Revealing now is a much, much more concealed world. It sounds like the potential for accomplishment of revelation has gone up tremendously. So it would mean that without their failure, this opportunity wouldn't have been available to us. That doesn't sound right. That doesn't sound right. They end up with a second-rate accomplishment if they do it right, as opposed to the accomplishment that they could have had, and actually did happen, by doing it wrong. Now let me think about this for a second. My mind is now crunching the numbers. Maybe, maybe it's not so. Maybe there's an extra premise here. If you imagine them experiencing 20% concealed, and had they done what they needed to do, they'd have gone to 100% revealed. In other words, from 80 to 100, and then going into the world to come. And what happened was they failed. The world deteriorated to 70% concealed, only 30% revealed. And for us to manage to get, to qualify, go to the world to come, we would have to achieve 100% revealed. Then we would have gone from 30 to 100, whereas had they succeeded, they'd have gone from 80 to 100. Our accomplishment would have been much greater, and therefore it would mean that their failure made possible for us a greater accomplishment. That sounds nuts, okay? But maybe that's the wrong picture. Maybe the picture is, had they succeeded, they'd have gone from 80 to 100. The world deteriorated. It's now sitting at 30, and we can't get to 100. And we're not required to get to 100. Maybe we're only required to get from 30 to 50 in the condition of greater concealment. But we won't be doing more than they did. What we're doing is moving 20 notches up the revelation ladder. The rest of it will be done automatically after we get to 50. And I'm beginning to think this is true. I hope I'm not just excited about a new idea. I begin to think this is true because the question, this is in the Ramachal's picture of how things work. The question is asked this way. You imagine they're in Gan Eden, right? And they have a challenge, and they have to achieve a goal. So imagine traveling a path. Now, halfway down the path, there's a crash, and they end up detouring into the swamp. And now they're lost in the swamp. You might think what they need to do is two things. First of all, get back on the road, and then finish the trip on the road. But that's wrong. That's wrong for sure. All of the secondary challenge is in the swamp. If you succeed in the challenge in the swamp, you're put back on the road and driven to the end. There's no second challenge on the road. That's for sure. Now, if I take that and apply it here, it could be that the accomplishment won't be a bigger accomplishment. It'll be a context of greater hiddenness. It'll be an accomplishment within a different context, with a different type of challenge, but not a qualitatively greater accomplishment. And therefore the reward won't be any greater. The reward, this relates to the idea that, you play chess with a chess master, he could say, you're going to lose, and when you lose, you'll have exactly one bishop and one knight and 6 pawns. And he can work it out. He can make that happen. But he can't predict the exact path of moves, because that depends upon the moves you choose. But he'll work it out, and he'll end up that way. No matter what you choose, he'll find a path to the end, to the same end. So sometimes they say that about the way Akadosh Baruch Hu runs the world. The pathway can vary because we make different choices, but he manipulates the consequences and the new choices in such a way that we get to the same end. So maybe that's a way to solve the problem. Yes, there's greater concealment. Yes, were it the case that we, in the greater concealment, would have the power to overcome the entire concealment, we would have accomplished more than they would have accomplished. But that's not given to us. Just like the trip down the road in Gan Eden isn't under our control anymore. We're not chased by that at all. That's taken away from us. We work only on the lower level. So that it could be that the amount of revelation of concealment that we accomplish is not different in amount. It's just different in context and different in quality. So, and that might be a solution. If that's a solution, then I've had a good day. A very good day. Yeah.
Just based on that, actually, I'm wondering. I think there's an idea that the level of revelation or concealment that exists now, or like not concealment, the level of revelation we have now, or at least the lesser form of it, has to do with the fact that we're not worthy for it. And I was curious if that's a concept we would hold to, that we're not at the level at which we're able to still receive that revelation.
Well, now, you said two things and they're not synonymous. One, you said we're not that level. That could have nothing to do with worth at all. That could be how you're created. I don't want you to receive it because I have something else for you to do. That would have nothing being worthy. It would be the challenge that you are chosen to address. The amount of concealment and the particular places where the concealment applies varies from generation to generation and from person to person. And it has a big effect on free will. For the generation that left Egypt, the choice between belief and atheism didn't exist. Atheism wasn't an option. They saw too much. That would be like a choice between believing that there are tables and not believing that there are tables. You don't have that choice. So you say, well, but in our generation we do have that choice. That's true, because of course Baruch Hu set up different conditions. So he wanted a certain generation to face the temptation of atheism, and another generation not to face that temptation. That has nothing to do with being worthy. That has to do with what he needs to accomplish in the world. It's sort of like saying, this guy is in the infantry and that guy is in the submarine. Is the guy in the submarine more worthy? No, we just need people fighting on land. We need people fighting under the water. We need people fighting everywhere. And people are assigned to different jobs, and different jobs need to be done. Nothing to do with being worthy. But the Ramchal stresses in detail, he wasn't really an outlier in Kabbalistic terms, but I haven't seen it in other places, that persons assigned to a certain function in the world, to a certain challenge in the world, and that can dictate something about his circumstances, which has absolutely nothing to do with his merit. Nothing at all. A person can be put into the world to sanctify God's name from a position of poverty, or sickness, or war, or whatever it is, and he can be the greatest tzaddik in the world. It won't help him, because that's what he was put here to do. So when you look at a person's circumstances, you can't read from the circumstances what his merit is, or what his worth is, because some of them are dictated by the circumstances. There's not only Ramchal, but there's a Tosfos someplace which talks about Mazal Elyon and Mazal Tachton. This flow we were talking about before divides it into two types. Mazal Elyon is the flow from above that supports and directs you in your ultimate challenge, what you were created for. And the Mazal Tachton is what supports you in terms of the means that you can make use of to fulfill that ultimate challenge. If you are dissatisfied with the conditions that are related to your ultimate challenge and you pray to God with all your heart, nothing will happen. Because that's what you were put here for. Too bad. That's not changeable. But if you pray to God about things which are only a means, that could change. That could change. So if Destler gives the example of someone who's put into the world to work on promoting study of Torah, and he's in a little town, poor town, and he's a malamed, he teaches kids in the cheder, 7-year-olds. That's how he's making his contribution to the study of Torah. And he prays to God that he wants to be a sailor, or he wants to be work on Wall Street, or whatever it is. It's not going to happen. Not going to happen. But suppose he prays for money. Could be that he'll somehow come into a great deal of money and move to the big city, and then people will solicit him to support institutions of Torah study, and he will make his contribution to Torah study that way. So the money is a question of a means, it's not the end. But being involved in Talmud Torah, rather than being a sailor or a Wall Street broker, that's his ultimate goal. You have this in a famous verse where Shmuel is talking to King Saul, and he says to him, is nim'as. He's nim'as and he's nimchal. He's, so to speak, changed his mind about you as king. He's taken away the kingdom and given it to somebody better. And he's given it to somebody better, and that person has it. It's going to be permanent because God doesn't change his mind. Now, the attentive reader says, hey, wait a second. You just said he does change his mind. Now you say he doesn't change his mind. God is not like man to change his mind. Man changes his mind, God doesn't change his mind. The word there is nimchal. So the commentators explain, Saul's being king was only a means. Saul is not from the tribe of Judah. Kings have to come from the tribe of Judah. The next one is David. David has to be king. He had a role to play, a preliminary role to play. And had he not failed, when David became king, he could have been the ruler of a province. To be a ruler under David. That could have been. But he sacrificed his position as a means to getting to David. And that's why it was taken away from him. But as far as David is concerned, he's from the tribe of Judah. He's going to be the fourth leg in the chair that supports the Kodesh Baruch Hu. That can't be changed because that's the purpose of the creation. Whereas Saul was only a means. Means can be changed. Purposes can't be changed. Ultimate purposes can't be changed. So this is roughly what's going on. Yeah.
I have kind of like, it's got two part. First, in the example they gave of the rabbi whose purpose is to propagate Torah learning. So does that theory or belief, does that say that if he were to like move to like an ocean, like a beach town and buy a boat and start sailing, that it would ultimately come crashing down on him and it wouldn't work out?
Or he'd lose his way at sea and find himself in Morocco where there's a school that needs a teacher and he'd end up being a teacher because he can't support himself any other way. He's going to be involved in Talmud Torah. It's not going to work.
So based on that, could you figure out your purpose in life by basically like feeling things out and trying different things and seeing what works and what doesn't?
I don't think so. There's a wonderful, Pri Tzaddik was a great thinker. And Tzidkas Tzaddik, he says, imagine two cases. Person chooses a goal, he chooses a means to the goal, he dedicates himself to the means faithfully, and he works as hard as he can, and he is phenomenally successful. He's ahead of schedule, and unexpected allies come to give him support, and he accomplishes double what? Do you deduce from that he was doing what the Kodesh Baruch Hu wanted? No, maybe he's giving him enough rope to hang himself. On the other hand, the person chooses the means and chooses the end, and he's working on it, and everything goes wrong. Obstacles arise, and his allies desert him, and he loses the property, and so forth and so on. Do you conclude from that his choice is wrong? Absolutely not. Maybe because Baruch Hu wanted to make it harder so that the accomplishment is a greater accomplishment. You don't read the signs. That's like reading tea leaves, or reading the entrails of birds. We don't do that. And those exact examples that he gives. Avram Avinu, on his way to the Akedah, to the proto-sacrifice of Isaac, the Satan creates in front of him a giant river. He didn't say, oh good, I can go home. He waded out in the river up to his neck, and he said, Ribono Shel Olam, you told me to go, and I'm going. And the river disappeared. So we don't read the signs. HaKadosh Baruch Hu gave us a rule book. We don't have to read the signs and interpret and hypothesize and theorize and guess and then test by, verify by our own testing. He gave us rules. The rule book is where you look for direction as to what actually needs to be done. Yeah.
Let's say that I'm a Jew who cares about the truth and is concerned with that, but I'm also, debauched, and my natural nature tilts me way afield from Judaism. And I'm trying to weigh these possibilities, and so I see that the case for Judaism might be the more likely one, that Hashem orchestrates history in this particular way with this particular plan. But when I square it up against, the infinite total of alternative possibilities, and so I get a number out of it, right? Like even as great as that one rational potential is, like 5% that Hashem guides the world, and it's His hand that leads it. But I have 95%, even if they're all smaller than that 5%, together they kind of gang up and outsource that one, and then I have this inherent drive that naturally makes me want to just ignore the 5% and pursue my whims. how do I navigate that situation? What do you think is the way to smash that apart?
I'm not sure that what you described is what's going on in your mind. Let's just add a little bit more detail. So you got 5% against 95%.
Yeah.
Now let's imagine that it works like this. There are 96 alternatives, 95 of which have each 1%, and one has 5%. Now imagine they are possible cures for a disease that you're suffering. You're going to take the 5%, because you got to take one of them. You can't take all 95. They're alternatives. So if they're alternatives, the 5 still wins against the 95.
So the thing in the wings is this desire to ignore the whole picture if I can and just pursue whim. And so that's outside of the 95, 96, and the 4.
Well, it shouldn't be. If this is the sum total of alternatives that there are for the picture in the universe, then by following your whims, you'll be accessing number 32, and then accessing number 47, and accessing number 9, and, right? And you'll be jumping around on the graph. But each one of them that you access with each of your actions has a 1% probability of being correct, and the last one has a 5% probability of being correct. So you ask me what you should do. What would you do if this was cures for a disease? You'd obviously choose the one with 5%.
So the truth doesn't divorce from the pleasure, in a sense. That's part of the answer there.
Golly, I didn't use the word pleasure at all. I don't know where we're coming from
you
that.
said if I'm following my whims, I'm jumping around in the 90.
But I didn't say about the pleasure. You just whim may have nothing to do with pleasure. You know who?
Then that's what I'm framing it as. Like my pleasure runs against the life that the 5% would lead.
Okay, so then who was saying this before about long-term and short-term? You know, you were saying it right. So I think there, I hope that you don't think it's appropriate to access short-term pleasures against long-term pleasure. Don't go to school and get an education. You know, don't take care of your diet. Don't you know. And, in certain respects, that's idiotic, right? You meet a girl and you want to marry her, and you say, "Well, I'm in a hurry. Would you marry me?" You're not going to get married. You know, end of story. Right? It's a little deferred gratification for all success. So no one throws away deferred gratification altogether. You know, the middle class has some purchase here. Yeah.
How is one to understand the role of emotions and how valid or invalid they are? God made us with a complicated mixture of logic, emotions, external, right, inclination for evil, for good. We're all made up of such a mix of external, I guess, voices pulling us in different directions. Emotions often get a bad rap as just leading us down a bad path or leading us towards our whims or our feelings, whatever, and again, what's really right or really true. But then on the other hand, it's hard to understand, well, what are they doing there in the first place then? And also, like, how much does God expect us to do what's right while going against our human emotions? Like how much validity should we give our emotions? How much are they valid?
This is an excellent question. It's an excellent question. I myself thought of this question a long time ago, and I worked hard on it. I don't have a fully adequate answer. I can give you some pieces. I have a whole share on the emotions. Maybe I should give it not in the distant future. But I think everything you said is correct, and I think you expressed it very well. The dynamics are there. They are part of our apparatus. I'll tell you that I think the global picture that I have, and maybe I'll say a few details. The emotions are associated with the body, as opposed to the mind. But it's a terrible mistake to rebel against being embodied, because Baruch Hu created us as body and soul working together. So a person who regrets having a body, rebels against the body, is rebelling against the creation. And the one way you see that in your terms is that there are mitzvos for the emotions. So if the emotions are the way that you fulfill mitzvos, they've got to have a positive role. There's even indication you can describe emotions as appropriate or inappropriate, or true or false in a certain way, even though David Hume denied this, because certain emotions are designed as reactions to certain circumstances. And if you have the emotion when the circumstances don't apply, then there's something wrong with that emotion. Not only practically speaking, it may not be practical at all, but for example, fear when you're not in danger is inappropriate. Right? That's straight. Then there's a logic of emotions. It's incoherent to say that I got what I was hoping for, and that made me disappointed. There's an incoherency there. Something else about it can make you disappointed. But to get what you're hoping for, it shouldn't lead to disappointment when you get it. It should lead to joy and thankfulness. So there are certain ways in which emotions can be out of touch with the reality that they're supposed to be relating to. Now, we have blessings that we make on such emotions. We make a blessing on an emotion that's out of touch with reality. So, for example, there's a blessing on something good that happens and something bad that happens. The Talmud asks, what would be if you have something that's both good and bad? Now, there's a variety of ways to do this, but the Talmud is interested in a particular case. And the case is where you have a field, and there's ripe wheat in the field. Next week, you're going to harvest it. And at the edge of the field, there's a river flowing. The river overflows and swamps the field and destroys the wheat, which is obviously bad. But in so doing, it deposits silt on the field and makes it more productive. So that 3 years from now, there's going to be a profit. That's good. What bracha do you make? The Gemara says you make the bracha on something bad. Because you worked 8 months on the wheat, and you protected it from insects and storms and everything else, and now you're going to harvest it, it goes down the drain, you feel terrible about it. Your mind knows that 3 years from now there's going to be a profit, but you don't feel that because your emotions are tied to your bodily existence. If you think about it, what you're going to do tomorrow is much more emotionally impacting to you than what you're going to do next summer or 10 years from now, or what you did last summer or 10 years ago. Or if an event takes place 2 miles from your home, and the same event takes place 1,000 miles from your home, you're affected by the one that's close by. So the emotions show the situatedness of the body, as opposed to the mind, which would say it makes no difference where it is or when it is. The mind is characteristic of the soul, for which time and space aren't barriers, and the emotions are characteristic of the body, for which time and space are barriers. You can only see till the next opaque surface. And you can only touch what you're in contact with, and you can only smell for a certain distance. So now, when the Torah tells us there are blessings for emotions that are out of touch with the reality that the mind is telling you, it means that the body is also real. The body also is valid. Being embodied is part of the purpose for which we are created. And therefore you can't turn your back on it. So I think you're right. The emotions play a necessary role. We could even go Havdil to Thomas Damasio, who says that without emotions you can't be rational. He has a whole theory, as a neurologist, has a whole theory about that. I think that you're right that people tend to discard them and to discredit them unnecessarily, unnaturally. I think this is part of a much bigger picture. It's a difference between reality and illusion. Reality and appearance. People oppose appearance to reality, and thereby degrade appearance. That's also incorrect, because an appearance is also reality. It's just how the thing relates to me rather than how it is in and of itself. But how it relates to me is just as much an objective fact as how it is in and of itself. And both are necessary. So, for example, when Abraham entertains the 3 guests, and it's machlokes whether he knew they were angels or didn't know they were angels. So if he did know they were angels, why did he offer them a meal? And the answer is, well, I know they're angels, but they appear as people. Why did God send me angels looking like people? Because he wanted me to give them a meal. It's the appearance that they have that dictates my interaction with them, not the reality. Because the appearance is also a reality. It's just a different kind of reality. So I think that appearances and emotions both are incorrectly degraded. What we have to understand is the positive role that they play. We definitely have evidence that they play a positive role. And now, to do the philosophical job of defining the role and setting it in comparison to other roles, and that's something which I have not been able to do in great detail. But this foundation is a foundation for what the kind of intuitions you are expressing, and I think that's where the story lies. Yeah.
When I got off the plane like 2 weeks ago and I walked down to the wall and I put my hand on it, I just like broke down crying. And I usually don't cry. And I know that's a feeling of Kedusha, but how do I describe that spiritual feeling?
I think you're stuck. You know, how do you describe the taste of strawberries? Oh, here's how you do it. It's the taste of strawberries.
Can you not describe it because it's not physical, and we can only describe physical?
I think that's basically right. If you think about it, the words that we have for non-physical things are often borrowed from the physical. Let's see, that question. Was it a hard question? How hard? Harder than granite? Harder than diamond? I don't mean hard like that, you know. Was that idea a deep idea? 6 miles deep? 8 miles deep? I don't mean deep like that. Okay, but then we need a vocabulary to talk about feelings and ideas and things that are abstract. And we borrow the physical because we don't have a direct vocabulary for those things. Right? A hard question is one that, because things that are hard require a lot of effort to interact with them, break them, move them. So a hard question requires a lot of effort. So you bother the idea of a lot of effort, and you use the word hard. So I think we really are limited in our ability to describe things other than the physical, which includes the emotional and the intellectual, and in certain types of sensory experiences. And if a person had never felt fear, there are no words that you would be able to use to communicate to him what fear was. You have the experience and you get a label, but that's not describing it. That's just, it's the label. Like one of my friend's grandchildren says, I know what olives are. When you go to the store, there's a jar. It says olives. That's what olives are, the thing in the olive jar. Well, he can pick them out. He can buy them for you if you want, but he doesn't know whether they're marbles or whether they're pistachios or they're just olives. OLIVES. So I think we're stuck that way. I don't think we can describe it that way. We try to communicate to someone. We do it by comparing it to other experiences, but direct vocabulary would be very, very difficult for us to do. Yeah, last thing. I've got to go.
What is true love? And how can we identify and deal with possible false love?
Last thing.
Asking questions which would take a week, but I heard from a Rebbe from what the Mazal says about it, but this would require a long time to unpack it in 2 minutes after we're upstairs teaching. True love is where the relationship is not based on anything that I get for myself. Number one, that's a negative. What it's based on is what the two of us can make and build together. It's not receiving, but it's doing. It's accomplishing. And there's something very precious that we can make and do together. That's the ultimate of true love. Now, not every project can be love, but that's the ballpark in which it lives. That's a very important thing. Okay.